With your views and opinions, you can email me at gbviews@gbnews.uk, or you can tweet me at GBNews. A very good afternoon and welcome to the programme.
A very good afternoon to you. It is 1 minute past 3. I'm Rosie Wright here to keep you up to date on GB News. The Prime Minister says Number 10 and the Treasury are working together in harmony to tackle the NHS backlog of hospital patient waiting lists in England. Well, the comment comes as Boris Johnson toured the Kent Oncology Centre at Maidstone Hospital with the Chancellor Rishi Sunak. Earlier, the Health Secretary had rejected reports that the plan's publication had been put on hold because the Treasury has refused to sign it off. Sajid Javid says the plan will be published shortly. Boris Johnson says the backlog is a government priority.
What we're doing is working together across the whole of government to fix the COVID backlogs, which, believe me, is a massive priority for us, for everybody in the country. And,
no doubt about the Chancellor's
absolutely not.
The Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, says the millions of people on a waiting list desperately need a plan.
The longer this takes, the greater will be the waiting lists. And we've had people on waiting lists, not only during COVID, but before COVID we had waiting lists that were far too high. So the government saying we need more time, it's not going to cut very much ice with those that are on the waiting list. You know, there's a price to be paid by a government that is distracted by all these allegations that are going on. And that price is being paid by the 6 million people who are waiting for their operations.
The Health Secretary has also said today that some of the recent criticism of the Prime Minister's wife, Carrie Johnson, was sexist, undignified and unfair. His statement follows the publication of extracts from Lord Ashcroft's new book, which accuses Mrs Johnson of her influencing her husband's decision-making. Carrie Johnson has insisted she plays no role in government and claims she's been targeted by enemies of the Prime Minister. The Criminal Cases Review Commission is to examine fresh evidence in the case of the mother and daughter Lynn and Megan Russell, who were murdered in Kent 26 years ago. It's after notorious serial killer Levi Belfield confessed to their murders. Our Home and Security editor Mark White has more.
He is one of the UK's most notorious serial killers. A former nightclub bouncer, Levi Belfield, is serving a whole life sentence for the murders of schoolgirl Millie Dowler, Marcia McDonnell and French student Amélie Delagrange. The revelation he has now confessed to the murders of mother and daughter Lynn and Megan Russell is a startling new development in that 26-year-old crime. Paul Bacon, the lawyer representing the man convicted of those killings, revealed he had now received a signed confession from Belfield. Paul Bacon's client, Michael Stone, has always maintained his innocence, but multiple appeals have been repeatedly rejected. Belfield is said to have revealed new information that could only have been known by the man who attacked Lynn Russell and her daughters in this quiet country lane in Kent. The new evidence will now be examined by the Criminal Cases Review Commission. Mark White, GB News.
The Children's Commissioner says there's still a long way to go on children's mental health, with only a third of young people currently able to access treatment. Dame Rachel D'Souza says some children are waiting too long to start treatment, and there are regional disparities on waiting lists. Although the average wait has decreased from 43 to 32 days, Imran Hussain, Director of Action for Children, told GB News the number of children with mental health conditions has jumped during the pandemic.
Back in 2017, the number of children, the equivalent figure was 1 in 9. So it's gone now from 1 in 9 to 1 in 6 in 2020. But we're still seeing lots of children being referred for mental health treatment in the NHS. We're still seeing a real issue about budgets being allocated for these services. And we're seeing children waiting a long time for treatment.
Now, in the last few minutes, the UK government has announced it's going to send hundreds of military personnel to Eastern Europe amid continuous tensions between Russia and Ukraine. 350 British troops are being sent to Poland on top of more than 100 Royal Engineers who were sent to help in the recent border dispute between Poland and Belarus. The Defence Secretary Ben Wallace said the additional troops were being sent as a bilateral agreement to show Britain and Poland stand side by side. You're now up to date here on GB News. I'll bring you more as it happens. Now back to the briefing with Darren.
Very welcome to the programme on this Monday afternoon. It is 6 minutes past 3 o'clock. Thank you very much indeed for your company. Always do get in touch, gbviews at gbnews.uk, and we'll get to some as we get through the programme. Well, over the weekend, the Prime Minister has continued his ruthless clear-out of Number 10 staff. Downing Street announced that the Cabinet Office Minister Steve Barclay is going to be his new Chief of Staff, and Mr Johnson's long-term ally, Geeta Harry, well, he's going to be his Director of Communications. The Prime Minister hopes that the restructure of his top team will placate disaffected Tory MPs as he tries to reset his administration. Well, the Prime Minister has been out and about today, and here's what Boris Johnson had to say.
You made some changes to staffing at Downing Street. Were any of the people you let go last week responsible for organising or attending rule-breaking parties at Downing Street?
If you'll forgive me, I'm focused completely on what we're doing now. And I know that people are interested in stuff going on at Westminster. Carl, I'm interested in what we at Westminster do to help people across the country. My job is to address what I think is the number one issue for this country, which is fixing the COVID backlogs. And so take oncology.
You can do that more effectively if you have a team working in Number 10 that's effective. I'm sure you'll agree. Have you had to reassure any of the new people you've been bringing in that this is a job with good long-term prospects, that you will still be there for?
I think what people want is for the government to focus not on stuff going on at Westminster, but to focus on life, Carl, beyond Westminster, and to focus on the needs of the country. And that is what we are doing. And frankly, what we need to do is look at, for instance, look at cancer care. And we don't have the best outcomes historically in this country. But one thing is changing, which is that people are now more willing to come forward and say that they suspect that they might have cancer. And so you're seeing an increase in people coming forward and seeking a diagnosis. So that's why we've been increasing investment in fantastic machines like this. That's why we've been increasing investment in NHS staff, in nurses, in radiographers. As I say, 45,000 more NHS staff this year than last year. But what you've got to do is make sure that people get a diagnosis within 28 days, one way or the other, because it's partly a question, obviously, of the outcome, but it's also about people's state of mind, and people need to know.
Nevertheless, I'm still going to stick to Downing Street staff.
Keep going.
Because it is
Keep
important.
going.
Have you had to reassure them that you are going to be Prime Minister for the long term? Did you and Geeta Harry sing I Will Survive?
Carl, we are focused, and I admire your tenacity, Carl, but we are focused completely, and it's absolutely the reality. Everybody at Number 10 and the Treasury are working together in harmony to deal with the big problems that the country faces. And clearing the COVID backlog, so we've got large numbers of people coming forward now to get a diagnosis, and lots of them didn't get diagnosed during the pandemic, during lockdown. We need to encourage people to come forward, but we need to contract the time. So, for instance, if you suspect that you have prostate cancer, for instance, there can be lots of different procedures, lots of different tests that you have to go through, and that causes delay. It means that the time expands. We want to find ways of using new technology, modernising systems to do it faster and more efficiently.
Finally, Prime Minister,
yes.
Does your wife give you political advice? Do you take it? And do you think it's fair that people ask questions about what her role is?
I think it's entirely fair for people to focus on the issues that I'm focused on, and that is number one, our priority, which is to tackle the COVID backlogs and rebuild our economy. We're fortunate because we took some decisions in Number 10 to double the pace of the booster rollout. We took some decisions that I think were very important a couple of months ago that enabled us really to get through the winter period without going into any further lockdown, any further restrictions. That's enabled us to come forward. What we've got to do now is look at the world as it is. Look at the state of the backlogs. Look at our wonderful NHS. Fought an incredible campaign against COVID, but so many people now coming forward with anxieties about things like cancer. And I bet everybody watching this can think of somebody they know who has an anxiety about that and who perhaps didn't get the scan or the treatment that they need. My message to them is you get that scan, get that diagnosis, and we will do absolutely everything in our power to make sure that you get a result in time. That's what this is all about.
There you go, the Prime Minister Boris Johnson speaking a little earlier, clearly wanting to focus on the NHS backlog rather than some of the politics about his new appointments in Number 10. Delighted to say we're now joined by the Associate Editor of the Daily Mirror newspaper, Kevin Maguire. Kevin, thank you for joining us. First of all, what do you make about these appointments, or make of these appointments? They are serious people, Steve Barclay, Geeta Harry. You know, these are the type of people that Tory MPs have been demanding Boris Johnson surround himself with.
They have, but let's not forget, Darren, that he appointed the ones he now says failed him. And of the 5 who've left, well, 2 went of their own volition, walked out. One of them, he's policy chief Munira Mirza, saying he'd made scurrilous remarks about Jimmy Savile, linking him to Keir Starmer. Another policy advisor went. The other 3, you could see why they had to go. And you're quite right. I've got a lot of time for Stephen Barclay, the Cabinet Office Minister. But of the 3 appointments, 2 of them are MPs, and that's because he can't get high-quality people to go into Downing Street now if they've got the jobs, because they will worry he's not going to be there, so they're not going to give up those jobs. Now, Geeta Harry has gone in, who is an old friend. He's gone from a company he was working at, a communications company that was co-founded by the joint chair of the Conservative Party. I do wonder when his spell is up, he will be able to go back. So, yes, you're quite right. Conservative MPs have been asking for change. They're going to see some of that change. Some of it's been forced on Boris Johnson. Some of it he's chosen to do it. But I don't think they will be reassured by Geeta Harry turning up and then singing a bit of Gloria Gaynor, I Will Survive, and saluting the Prime Minister, and the Prime Minister saying he should take the knee because he is there. I don't think that is the seriousness that will reassure Conservative MPs.
It's certainly an interesting strategy, isn't it, Kevin? No one can accuse them of not being transparent, given that interview released only a couple of days after it happened. Interestingly, though, as well, on other issues, we've got, of course, the allegations in the paper, this new serialisation about Carrie Johnson's role in government. The Prime Minister's wife, she denies she's got something the Prime Minister was asked about in that clip there by Carl Dinnan of ITV, which he refused to answer. But interestingly, she's gone essentially on the offensive, hasn't she, kind of attacking these reports as entirely untrue.
No, absolutely, really gone on the offensive. And when the question was asked of Boris Johnson there, I thought he started to ventilate until he got control, because, of course, he'll want to protect his wife, as any partner would. Now, I don't believe the partner of any Prime Minister has no influence. They do. The accusation against Carrie Johnson is she has more than most, because, let's not forget, she was a special advisor to cabinet ministers. She used to be the head of communications at the Conservative Party, so she's a very political figure. And she is accused of getting some of her friends into Downing Street and also influencing policy. Now, I think the extent of some of the attacks, and Michael Ashcroft, a Tory peer, has a biography out on her, are probably very sexist. Now, Dominic Cummings, who was an advisor, the closest advisor to the Prime Minister until they fell out spectacularly, and he now wants to bring down Boris Johnson. He makes no bones about that. Now, he's attacking the influence of Carrie Johnson. And Dominic Cummings lost a power battle with her. That's why he was forced to walk at the end of 2020. Now, he clearly wants revenge, but some of it you do think it goes too far. She's painted as Lady Macbeth, and it can be sexist. But at the same time, all criticism of her isn't sexist, and some of it is legitimate. It's just trying to get to the truth of exactly how much influence she has. But the Prime Minister is quite clearly very defensive about his wife.
And Kevin, also something that's emerged over the weekend that we know these tensions have been around for a while is this kind of power struggle that we've seen repeatedly in many governments over time between Rishi Sunak, the Chancellor, and the Prime Minister, not least of all on extra money that was meant to come forward today to clear that NHS backlog. Is it your sense that kind of Rishi Sunak is thinking, well, you know what, in many ways I might hold back some of this money because it might be money that I want to announce when I become Prime Minister? Or am I getting carried away there?
Yeah, look, I've covered politics all the way back to the Thatcher period when she fell out with Dominic Lawson, her Chancellor of the Exchequer, who walked. About the only pairing I can't remember big public battles between were David Cameron and George Osborne. But there's clearly now huge tension between Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak. We saw it break out into the open last week when Rishi Sunak criticised Boris Johnson over that Jimmy Savile smear slur against Keir Starmer. So you've got to wonder if the money hasn't been approved for the NHS. Is Rishi Sunak, the Treasury, thinking, right, I'll hold it back because I may be the Prime Minister soon? Now, it's also true that the Treasury has to make sure public money, taxpayers' money, is spent wisely, so plans have to be looked at and costed. And Sajid Javid, the Health Secretary, to say, look, we're in negotiations, we're just not there yet, it's delayed. I agreed it would be delayed. But you see the Prime Minister in a hospital where he wanted to unveil this great big plan, this very grand plan, this vision, a waiting list in England, around 6 million, that's the highest on record. He wanted to have a plan. He didn't have a plan. And so he's standing there kind of talking about the NHS without doing anything about it. And he's having to face all those questions about the parties that he wants to move on from. And now he's got the tensions with Rishi Sunak. I don't think there's a Conservative MP now in the House of Commons who doesn't think Sunak is sizing up Downing Street and wondering how to make his move. He won't be the only one. Some argue Liz Truss, the Foreign Secretary, is playing a better game at the moment, but she too effectively has an unofficial campaign. And the only way Boris Johnson can stop those campaigns is to somehow reinforce, reassert his authority. And he's finding it incredibly difficult to do so.
OK, Kevin, for the time being, and I'm going to stay with us. Thank you, Kevin Maguire there from the Daily Mirror. And we're hoping to speak to a Conservative MP, Matt Warman, in a couple of minutes. Lots of you getting in touch. GBViews at gbnews.uk. This is from Shane. I think that one of the reasons Carrie Johnson is being critiqued in such a manner is because people are stunned that the Conservatives have the identical politics as the Liberals. So people are trying to figure out where this hardcore radical left agenda is coming from. Meanwhile, RS has emailed in saying that we cannot ignore the fact that Carrie Symonds worked in Number 10. She knows how it works. She knows who is who, and she's got her own strong left-leaning woke green views. Don't think she worked in Downing Street, but she did work at Conservative Party headquarters. And also Stuart Abbott saying that my son-in-law, 48-year-old, was diagnosed with bladder cancer 5 months ago, and his treatment has not yet been determined, let alone started. What Boris Johnson was saying today regarding early diagnosis within 28 days is hogwash. I don't know if it's just another lie, spin, or simple naivety. GBViews at gbnews.uk. We're going to pause there on the briefing. Coming up in just a couple of minutes, we're going to get the latest on the situation between Russia and Ukraine, as the UK have announced in the last hour they're going to send 350 British troops to Poland. We'll have more on that, and we'll be live in the Commons with an urgent question. That all after the weather from the Met Office.
Hello again. Rain and cloud for many of us overnight as a weather front sinks south, but with all the cloud in the sky, it will act as a blanket and keep things mild. The cloud, you can see, has become extensive across the UK during Monday, and overnight we keep much of that cloud in place. Even where it breaks a little across England and Wales, we'll keep enough of a breeze to stir the air up and prevent a frost. Heavy rain pushes south across Scotland, clearing into southern Scotland, Northern Ireland and northern England by the start of Tuesday. And for most, temperatures as we begin things, 7 or 8 Celsius 2 to 4 in the far north of Scotland, because here we're into the colder but brighter weather behind the weather front, and we're going to see blustery showers into the north and west of Scotland throughout much of Tuesday. Meanwhile, the front slows down, and so for southern parts of Northern Ireland, for the far south of Scotland, northern England, it stays cloudy and damp throughout Tuesday afternoon. But to the south again, drier, brighter, 12 or 13, perhaps even 14 Celsius in the southeast of England, given some sunshine. And that's how things look as we go into Tuesday night. Further rain at times for northern England and parts of North Wales. To the south, staying drier with some clear spells, but mild. To the north, for much of Scotland and Northern Ireland, it's a blustery night with further showers coming through, particularly for northern and western Scotland, the north coast of Northern Ireland. Those showers falling as snow over the hills initially of Scotland, but as colder air arrives from the northwest during Wednesday, I think that snow level will come down. We could even see some snow to lower levels, but certainly settling over the higher parts of Scotland throughout much of Wednesday. So a mild start to the day for England and Wales, given the cloud and rain sinking south by this stage. The rain petering out, and by Wednesday morning, really, it's confined to the far south. Blustery showers, though, continue for Scotland and Northern Ireland, with some winteriness in those showers in the far north.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before. It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood, and every weekday we bring you The Briefing live from 9:30 a.m. The stories, analysis and live debate that you need to hear.
Quite right, Tom, of course.
Was this something that had been considered at all?
Difficult to answer.
Gas-guzzling helicopters circling. Noise is being made here. Joe Biden walking out. Thank you very much for joining us. Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, Monday to Friday, 9:30 a.m. on GB News.
Join me, Gloria De Piero, Monday to Thursday at noon for The Briefing. We go to the parts of Parliament that you won't see elsewhere. Plus, there's exclusive interviews with MPs from all parties.
But quite often, they paper over the real truth. Why does a working class lad like you join the Tories?
That's a good question.
Don't miss it, Monday to Thursdays at noon on GB News.
Very welcome back to The Briefing here on GB News. It is 25 minutes past 3 o'clock. Thank you for your company. Now, the French President Emmanuel Macron is on a mission to Moscow to promote a peace plan to the Russian President Vladimir Putin after a flurry of diplomatic activity that includes talks with the US President Joe Biden this weekend and 3 phone calls with Putin. Macron has landed in Moscow this afternoon. Russia, of course, is denying that it is planning to invade Ukraine, but tens of thousands of troops are continuing their presence at its border, prompting, of course, concerns that it could be imminent. The US has ordered around 3,000 extra troops to bolster NATO's eastern flank in Poland and Ukraine. And within the last hour, the UK government, the Defence Secretary Ben Wallace, has announced that 350 British troops are also going to go to Poland. Well, let's get more on this. Joining Home Affairs and Security Editor Mark White, who's in the studio with us. Mark, good afternoon to you. Just brings up to date with what Ben Wallace has been saying in the last hour.
Yeah, he's been meeting with his Polish counterpart today and expressing solidarity with the Polish people at a time, of course, of very significant tension in that area. And he has announced a bilateral agreement to send an additional 350 military personnel to Poland. Now, that's on top of 100 Royal Engineers who were sent to Poland. You'll remember a few months back when we had very significant tensions between Poland and Belarus over the migration issue, when it's claimed that the Belarusians were pushing migrants over the Polish border, and there was a standoff for a good few weeks with the Polish building and securing their border fences along there. The British were in that area, the Royal Engineers sent to help bolster those defences on the border there. Well, these 350 new troops are being sent really to send a message to the Russians that Britain stands full square behind its European allies, including Poland. We, of course, have 900 military personnel as part of a British battle group that the UK is taking a lead on. In Estonia, there's another 100 British personnel who are in Ukraine itself, who are helping train Ukrainian troops to work these shoulder-launched tank missiles that they've been given by Britain in recent weeks as well. So while the diplomacy is continuing apace, and as you mentioned there, Emmanuel Macron has been meeting with Vladimir Putin, and he believes there's cause for optimism. While that's been happening, there has been no end at all to the military manoeuvres on the border with Ukraine. In fact, just over the weekend there, thousands more Russian troops heading further closer towards the border.
And so what can Emmanuel Macron hope to achieve? He seems kind of slightly at odds, actually, with Britain and the United States, thinking that actually this war is not imminent. He's in Moscow today. Can he be a kind of peace broker, if you like?
I think that's exactly the term probably to describe him. I think he's seeing himself as a bit of a broker here, and he's taking a more conciliatory tone with Russia. He says that Russia is absolutely entitled to the concerns it has with regards to its own national security. And we know that Russia has been concerned for a number of years at what they see as the ever eastward movements, encroachment of NATO right up to its borders. We have 14 Eastern European countries that have joined NATO since the fall of the Soviet Union. Russia says that's against a verbal assurance it was given in the 90s that there wouldn't be an eastward expansion of NATO. They said the reality is very different on the ground. The last thing they want is for Ukraine to become a member of NATO as well. That is one of their demands, that Ukraine should not be allowed to join NATO. Well, of course, that's completely unacceptable to NATO members, especially Britain and the United States, who say that that is off the table. That's not even up for consideration.
OK, Mark White, as always, thank you very much indeed for your analysis, Mark White there. And we'll bring you the latest, of course, from Moscow. Let's see how those talks, how they go. Mark, thank you. Well, we're expecting to go to the House of Commons in the next couple of minutes, where there's an urgent question on the NHS backlog about just what funding is going to be provided to it. Before we go and hear that question from Wes Streeting to the Health Secretary, let's speak to Kevin Maguire, who is still with us. Kevin, good afternoon to you. This really matters, doesn't it? I know we talk about politics and Partygate, and people might think it doesn't matter. Lots of people think it does matter, but there is no doubt that the millions now on this NHS waiting list, this is really serious stuff.
No, it is a record number in England, 6 million, partly COVID, but it was rising before then over a trend. And it's a core issue, rather like the cost of living, quality of the environment, law and order, transport, education. And the NHS, we all use it. There's very few people in Britain who have private medical care. We rely on the NHS. And if you can't get those operations, you're in trouble. And there are huge numbers now waiting more than 2 years. And they're said to be non-urgent operations. But if you've got a problem with your hip or your knee and it impairs your mobility, that means you can't live your life in the way you would want. You may not be able to work the way you would, and it'll weigh down heavily on your mind. So it's one of those crucial bread and butter issues.
Isn't it fascinating, though, Kevin, normally the Labour Party are ahead when it comes to the National Health Service in terms of polls. A poll out of the weekend, though, suggesting actually for the first time in quite a long time that Labour were now ahead of the Conservatives in all major issues facing the country. And I think that was what must be worrying Conservative MPs, that whether it's on crime, whether it's on the cost of living or the management of the economy, health and everything else, that actually Labour now, according to these polls, is ahead on every single one of those questions.
As Darren, including migration immigration, which is an area Labour have traditionally trailed on, and the Conservatives done well. But Labour's ahead on that now. It's also ahead on overall economic competence. That's one of the holy trinity of polling. Economic competence. The other is who would make the best Prime Minister. Now it is often Starmer, not Johnson. And then the third, of course, is the overall figure in the parties. And you're right, that will really worry Conservative MPs, Conservative voters, those who want a Conservative government, because people are turning their backs on them now. It began in November, really, and it didn't begin with parties. It began with sleaze, when Boris Johnson tried to get Owen Paterson, a Conservative MP who'd been found to have breaking the rules, lobbying for more than 100,000. He tried to get him off the hook and change the rules. And there was that breach of trust. Whatever you thought of Boris Johnson before, and a lot of people would give him the benefit of the doubt. They quite liked his casual approach. Some people were grateful for Brexit, others, of course, opposed him for that. But nevertheless, he was there in number 10, and he had the nation, he had broad approval. And then he lost it. He blew it. And it's just gone from bad to worse since. And it's how can you win it back? And it may be, if he doesn't sort out the NHS, or when inflation's topping 7% this coming year, national insurance is going up, energy bills are soaring, he may be looking back and thinking all the flack and stick and the difficult time I had with parties are nothing compared to this, because they are the big issues he will not be forgiven for if he fails to get them right, and if he keeps blundering and they aren't working, because he has some control over it. You have some control over NHS waiting lists by how much you spend, how it is spent, and you also have some control on living standards. When you're putting up national insurance, you won't take off VAT on energy bills, or, for instance, consider a windfall tax on the huge profits in the North Sea, those producers, when they're not doing any extra work for it. They've just been lucky because world prices have soared, so they're able to charge more.
OK, Kevin, thank you very much indeed. That's Kevin Maguire there from the Daily Mail joining us. Let's now go over to the Commons, where that urgent question on health spending has been put by Wes Street.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the COVID-19 pandemic has had a huge impact on healthcare systems everywhere. The NHS has performed incredibly, caring for COVID and non-COVID patients alike, and delivering the vaccination programme that's helped us to open up this country once again. Throughout the pandemic, we had to take steps to make sure we could treat those with the greatest clinical need and make sure that we provided a safe environment for those who needed COVID care. As a result, there is undeniably a huge COVID backlog that needs urgent attention. The number of people waiting for care in England now stands at around 6 million, and we know that this figure will get worse before it gets better. Not only that, our best current estimate is that around 8.5 million people haven't come forward for treatment during the pandemic who normally would do. But we are pulling out all the stops to help the NHS recover and make sure patients are receiving the right care at the right time. Honourable members will be aware that the government has invested over £8 billion in the NHS in the 3 years from 2022-23 to 24-25. And as part of the new health and social care levy, we will be putting huge levels of investment into health and social care over the coming 3 years. All the time, we're announcing new solutions for how we can make sure the NHS is on the firmest footing for the future. On Friday, we launched a call for evidence that will inform an ambitious new vision for how we lead the world in cancer care. As the Prime Minister announced earlier today, we are setting out some tough targets for the NHS on cancer. We want to ensure that 75% of patients are diagnosed or have cancer ruled out within 28 days of a GP referral, and to get the backlog of people waiting more than 2 months for their cancer treatment by March 2023 to pre-pandemic levels. Today, the NHS has also announced the launch of a new platform, My Planned Care, which will provide patients and their carers with relevant and up-to-date information ahead of planned treatment. This includes information on waiting times for their provider. Mr. Speaker, I am under no illusions that our health system is facing an enormous and unprecedented challenge. That is why we are doing everything in our power to support the NHS and its patients, recovering services, to reduce waiting times and deliver more checks, operations and treatments. We are faced with a once-in-a-generation challenge. We know we must get this right. We are working with the NHS and across government to deliver a targeted and far-reaching plan for elective recovery, and we will be updating the House at the earliest possible opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This isn't a COVID backlog, this is a Tory backlog. We went into the pandemic with NHS waiting lists already at a record 4.5 million, and now 6 million people are waiting on NHS waiting lists, more than ever before. More than 1 million are waiting for scans and tests used to diagnose cancer. And the NHS itself is waiting for the government's plan to deal with the backlog. So where is it? It was due to be published today, but was pulled last night. It's like something from the thick of it, but the reality is worse than fiction. A photo op without a plan. Their own NHS recovery plan, just another cancelled operation. But don't worry, Mr. Speaker, because there's a website coming that will tell people they're waiting a long time, even if there's no plan to make sure that they don't. And then there's the reason for the delay. Briefings for the Department for Health and Social Care claimed the Chancellor blocked the plan because, to quote one government official, it's pretty obvious it's about Treasury reluctance to rescue the Prime Minister. Is this where the shambles of the Conservative Party have taken us? The Chancellor, is he seriously playing political games while 6 million people wait for care? No wonder the Health Secretary hasn't bothered to show his face this afternoon. He's probably still recovering from the embarrassment of this morning's media round, where the big announcement was, literally, that there is no announcement. So it's been left to the Prime Minister to clear things up, which tends to go almost as well as breakfast television with the Culture Secretary. No wonder she's been dispatched to the Middle East. But on to those tough targets the Minister mentioned. Today, the Prime Minister announced a new target that no one should wait more than 2 months for cancer diagnosis. But there was already a target for the vast majority of cancer patients to be treated within 2 months of referral, and it hasn't been hit since 2015. Isn't this just another example of the Conservatives lowering standards for patients because they consistently fail to meet them? The Prime Minister has also announced that 3 out of 4 patients should receive a cancer diagnosis within 28 days. But this is an existing target that was introduced last April and has never been met. So, Mr. Speaker, the waiting list crisis is the chickens coming home to roost after more than a decade of Tory failure. The Treasury blocked a plan for staffing, and now they're blocking the plan to cut waiting time. So isn't it now clear, amidst the chaos, confusion and spectacular incompetence on display, that the longer we give the Conservatives in government, the longer patients will wait?
There we go. That was Wes Streeting, Labour Shadow Health Secretary, putting an urgent question to the government. He's saying that this isn't a COVID backlog, this is a Tory backlog, and more people are waiting than ever before. The Health Minister, Ed Argos, saying, though, that 6 million people on that waiting list, and it is likely to get worse before it gets better. Well, let's now speak to the Conservative MP and former Assistant Government Whip, Matt Warman. Matt, very good afternoon to you. Wes Streeting there claiming that this money is not forthcoming because the Chancellor does not want to come to the aid of the Prime Minister. Is that fair?
No, I don't think it is. I think it's a bit rich to suggest that Rishi Sunak wants anything other than really good value for money in the health service. And the reason that I think it is maybe not completely unreasonable to wait another day or two to get to a plan is because it will be signed off by those Treasury officials who very much want to see the NHS delivering maximum bang for our buck. This is the sort of thing where I do think we need to get reform in the NHS as well as just putting the money that it needs into it as well.
Let's move on to the announcement that did at least happen this weekend, which is several new names inside Downing Street. What's your initial thoughts of these new senior advisors to the Prime Minister, Geeta Harry, Andrew Griffiths and, of course, Steve Barclay?
Well, Geeta Harry, of course, is someone who's worked with the Prime Minister at great length, especially while he was at City Hall. He's got a real track record himself. So I think that is good news. And I think also the fact that you've got the Chief of Staff will now be a Member of Parliament. Some people saying that that is too much work. I would say actually having the Chief of Staff and the Prime Minister in the Commons accessible to MPs is probably a good thing. And let's bear in mind to those people who say that it's not going to work. Angela Merkel had her chiefs of staff in the Bundestag. It seemed to work pretty well for her. So I think this can be done, and it's really important that it is done effectively, because this is what will allow us to really get on with sorting out the NHS backlog, really get on with tackling some of those issues around energy prices, for instance. So it can't come soon enough, but I think those announcements at the weekend are good news.
But is that right, Matt? Because when I look back at British politics and I think of, some of the more successful prime ministers, certainly electorally, whether that be Margaret Thatcher or Tony Blair, they didn't really have to consult their backbenchers about what they needed to do within government. They were strong enough to find their own policy agenda. And in the end, this is actually a sign of weakness, isn't it? And potentially a sign of chaos, because lots of MPs are going to want the Prime Minister to do lots of different things. He can't possibly please all of them all of the time.
No, and nor should he. I think it's obviously important that the Prime Minister and the Number 10 operation is able to explain what they're doing in a way that convinces members of Parliament. Of course, that's right. But we should also bear in mind that the ideas on the backbenches around policy are what will prevent mistakes from arising, what will prevent miscommunication from arising in the first place. To give you one example, Rishi Sunak was writing about free ports when he was a backbencher. He's now in a position to implement those. So I think this is an example of something where you really can put some accountability into the system that perhaps wasn't there under some of its predecessors, and where you can really try and grease the wheels of government. That's really important to get things done quickly and properly. But in the end, these are very important announcements. Clearly, whoever advises the Prime Minister, really does matter. But what's going to decide Boris Johnson's future is not necessarily who is in Downing Street with him. It's going to be that report from the Metropolitan Police, or indeed Sue Gray's report in full. Surely that's what's going to decide the Prime Minister's future, about whether he broke his own rules. Well, I think he himself has said, look, we should wait for those reports. I think he's absolutely right to say that. But I do think the other thing that's worth really bearing in mind is if you look at the state of the economy, if you look at the state of the vaccine rollout, you look at other countries going in the opposite direction on COVID, then this is a Prime Minister where you should think about the record as a whole. Now, of course, it's right to consider what's going on with the party's investigations. I'm not pretending no one's raising it by any means, but what I do think is really important is that we focus on getting on with all of those big issues, and we bear in mind that when we've had to deal with those big issues before, the PM has got those big calls right. Well, he got them right, many might say, because a lot of MPs rebelled against him. He had no real choice, and his cabinet also opposed them. Again, I come back to this point that it's not necessarily leadership, it's just that he's found himself in a position where he's got no choice in the matter. Well, I think it's not quite fair to blame the PM for everything that has gone wrong, but not to give him the credit for everything that has gone right. Ultimately, the vaccine rollout, the approach that was taken on curbs over Christmas, for instance, ultimately, they were number 10 policies that got through Parliament and ended up being shown to be very much the right decision. So I do think he should be given credit for the things that he has got right. And I do think, of course, backbenchers have got a range of views, but we should all surely acknowledge that on that vaccine rollout, on the economy, on the moves that have been announced to tackle some of the cost of living stuff already, and I'm sure there's more to come, then there is a lot to be genuinely proud of. And there are, of course, those investigations that shouldn't really be prejudged until we know what they say.
OK, Matt, really appreciate your time this afternoon. That is what
Pleasure.
Matt Warman there, the Conservative MP, joining us from the Commons. Thank you for joining us here on GB News, Matt. Well, let's now speak to Conservative Councillor, former Special Advisor Claire Purcell, who joins us down the line. Claire, what was your reaction there to what Matt had to say, welcoming those changes inside Number 10 over the weekend?
Well, I take a little bit of a different view to Matt Warman and can't see quite how Steve Barclay can manage being a minister in cabinet and an MP and a chief of staff. I don't think that you can give your all to those three jobs when all three of them are equally important and time consuming.
In the sense that, you know, obviously this job's been held by one person before who was an unelected official, and now Steve Barclay's meant to be an MP, a cabinet minister, and also as chief of staff. I mean, it sounds like it's almost physically impossible, if nothing else.
Well, yes, it does. And who is he going to be answerable to? Is he answerable to, you know, the cabinet as a whole, directly to the Prime Minister, members of Parliament in the House of Commons? It just seems a little bit too much for one person to be able to keep all of that strategy in one place. Backbenchers are now going to look to him to take their ideas forward to the Prime Minister, as you would do with a Chief of Staff. And so I'm not sure that he's going to be able to be around the tea rooms and around the Commons and in Number 10 and in the Cabinet Office without taking a huge hit personally and also not giving his all to that job. I mean, that's got to be the most important thing, is that you give everything to the job you have.
Where's your sense of where we're at now in terms of the wider politics of all of this and the clear discontentment we've seen amongst some Conservative MPs? We'd some more letters at the end of last week. Is it now your sense that actually MPs are going to hold off until we see that Met's report, or indeed Sue Gray's full report, or is it still squeaky bum time, if you like, for the PM?
Well, I think there's always going to be a certain amount of discomfort for the Prime Minister. You've got a set of local elections coming up in May, and you have the report coming from the Met. So there will be some of those MPs sitting there waiting to see what these things bring and to see what other changes he's going to make. He's made some changes to his sort of top team, but it just depends on who replaces them, who gets moved in, and what the attitude is going to be. But I think at the moment, this is not enough perhaps for members of Parliament. I think the wider general public at the moment are quite fed up with it. But for members of Parliament, I'm not sure that he's doing what they need and as quickly as they need.
OK, Claire, as always, thank you very much indeed for your analysis. That's Claire Purcell there, Conservative Councillor and former Special Advisor, joining us from Kent. Thank you, Claire. Now, let's move on, because the government's new online safety bill, designed to crack down on harmful content on the internet, is going to be made more robust, with tech firms set to be ordered to proactively seek out and remove dangerous content, including drug dealing, weapons fraud and revenge porn. Until now, platforms were only obliged to address such content once a user had reported it. So is the legislation a necessary measure to protect people online, or is it a potential threat to the freedom of speech? Well, join me now to discuss this is the CEO of INEQE Safeguarding Group, Jim Gamble. Jim, good afternoon to you. Thanks for joining us here. You're someone who thinks that this legislation is necessary.
Well, I think legislation is necessary, but I think it needs to be meaningful, and it must, of course, be balanced. Because the last thing I would ever want to do is to infringe upon free speech. I'm not convinced that the government has got the balance right. And that's not that I think it infringes the free speech debate. It's because I think it will lack effective teeth. So it's all well and good on paper creating 3 new offences, which are really previous offences brought up to date. It's all well and good saying that you're going to hold big tech companies' feet to the fire. And when big tech companies already employ hash code, they already employ photo DNA, they have artificial intelligence and human moderators online. So I'm not sure exactly where the devil in the detail is going to make a big difference in this. But the critical player in all of this is the government itself. And nowhere in the Online Harms Act or any of the papers associated with it is there a commitment to increase the level of policing on the internet. So it's okay to say, get people to keep criminals out of the shopping mall, out of those public spaces and places. But when they report them, you need to have the ability to respond and hold people to account, because that will deter others from committing offences. And this government hasn't done that. In the last 10 years since they were part of the coalition, they have absolutely, kind of asset stripped the safeguarding environment. We went from a period when we only had about 55,000 vacancies between health and social care. We now have nearly 200,000 vacancies. We lost over 20,000 police officers. We lost lots of police support staff. And you just don't replace those overnight. But even when we had those numbers before the government diluted it, there were difficulties. And I know, because I'm the former chief executive of the Child Exploitation Online Protection Centre. I know what those difficulties were. A handful of police officers dealing with a tsunami online. And if you want to put this in context, in 2012, you had between 80 and 100,000 predators who represented a threat to children who may go online. We knew at the start of the pandemic that had gone up to about 300,000, and the National Crime Agency's strategic threat assessment this year tells us at a medium level they think that's about 750,000. So producing a paper makes no difference. You've got to invest in the resource.
Is the government's hope?
Children.
Sorry, Jim, but from what I see, is that the government's hope is that essentially they want these media companies to police themselves, or to police, and you're saying that that's simply that's not good enough.
That will never happen. If the government really wanted to take on the big tech companies, if the government had the courage of their convictions, they'd tax them. They would use the tax to hypothecate that funding into services like children and adolescents' mental health, so that young people who were vulnerable, who had low self-esteem, who were going online into pathways of harm that accelerate them into problems around radicalization, sexualization, and gang affiliation, that they could have the offline support that they need. So tax these companies by all means, hypothecate that funding and use it to increase the policing resources that can patrol the information superhighway. But don't just do what's cheap. Don't just grab the easy headline. Let's not forget a number of years ago, this government said, in a media kind of campaign, we are going to stop people being able to access adult pornography. Well, what happened? How well did that go? The truth is, it didn't. They realized the harsh practicalities of the mechanism that facilitates the internet meant that they couldn't do it. So I think we've got to get beyond mere rhetoric. Tomorrow is Internet Safety Day. It's the 18th Internet Safety Day that I've been involved in. And you know what? I'm willing to bet you can't remember what last year's theme is, because these rhetorical themes are pretty much meaningless until we start holding free people to account who go online to threaten our children, the groomers, the gangsters, all of those people. Then we're not going to create an active deterrent. And we can have smoke and mirrors till the cows come home. But this is not going to work in its present format. We're rehashing old news.
OK, Jim Gamble, appreciate your thoughts on that. There are many people, I'm sure, who will disagree. And hopefully, as this works its way through Parliament, we'll have you back on again as well. Jim, thank you very much indeed. That's Jim Gamble there joining us from Belfast. Lots of you all get in touch. Barry Hunt, actually, as you said, this is the thin wedge. So the end of the wedge, and it's definitely a calculated assault on free speech. It's blindly obvious what's been done. It won't stop here. In terms of healthcare stuff, we've heard from Odette Griffiths, who says, I'm furious that Sajid Javid has said he's got no regrets about putting social care and NHS staff out of their jobs due to them not being vaccinated. How dare he? He's caused stress, mental health and financial ruin for many people before overturning this unnecessary action. And someone else, Raymond Cornish, says that Britain voted not for Boris, but to get out of the Brussels project, which he promised everything. And for a year, that was OK until Carrie during the initial COVID. Carrie is now steering towards a socialist agenda. GBViews at gbnews.uk. Always get in touch, keen to hear from you. That is it from the briefing for today. Thank you for your company on this Monday afternoon. I'll be back at 12 and 3 tomorrow here on GB News. Up next, it is Colin Brazier between 4 and 6. You will not want to miss that. But first, at the start of the week, let's bring you up to date with all the latest weather and head to Exeter and the Met Office. See you tomorrow.
Hello again. Rain and cloud for many of us overnight as a weather front sinks south, but with all the cloud in the sky, it will act as a blanket and keep things mild. The cloud, you can see, has become extensive across the UK during Monday, and overnight we keep much of that cloud in place. Even where it breaks a little across England and Wales, we'll keep enough of a breeze to stir the air up and prevent a frost. Heavy rain pushes south across Scotland, clearing into southern Scotland, Northern Ireland and Northern England by the start of Tuesday. And for most, temperatures as we begin things, 7 or 8 Celsius, 2 to 4 in the far north of Scotland, because here we're into the colder but brighter weather behind the weather front. And we're going to see blustery showers into the north and west of Scotland throughout much of Tuesday. Meanwhile, the front slows down, and so for southern parts of Northern Ireland, for the far south of Scotland, Northern England, it stays cloudy and damp throughout Tuesday afternoon. But to the south again, drier, brighter, 12 or 13, perhaps even 14 Celsius in the southeast of England, given some sunshine. And that's how things look as we go into Tuesday night. Further rain at times for Northern England and parts of North Wales.